Welcome to the Podunk Polymath, a podcast dedicated to the sentiments of a secular, sarcastic, screwed-up Southern SJW and skeptic. I'm your host, Chris. Come on in. This is episode 33 of the Podunk Polymath Podcast. Thanks once again for joining me. Hope y'all had a great weekend. This week I wanted to talk about, in the pre-ramble, the failure of the Republicans to get rid of Obamacare, also known as ACA, the Affordable Care Act. Oh, the joy, the joy. So what happened was Paul Ryan pulled the vote just before it was supposed to go on because he realized he did not have the votes for it to pass in the House. Of course, it was an interesting coalition. Those on the right side of the party who thought it didn't go far enough, and those on the moderate side who thought that there were too many good things and they couldn't do it without replacing it with something, that worked, basically, which they never had in the begin with. This was just some bullshit move. All 8 years when Obama, they held like 100 fucking votes to get rid of it, but now then it comes right down to it. They don't have the votes to fucking do it. They didn't have anything to replace it with. So their lies are exposed, and they might have just lost the 2018 midterms by this spectacular move. So it's great news, I have to tell you. I'm not at all sad about it. Like I said on a tweet, it ain't the, Obamacare is not the best in the world, but it's better than the shit sandwich they were trying to feed us with this. Of course, some of the spectacular things that this bill would have done, this so-called replacement, which is ridiculous to even call it that because all it does is the same old Republican bullshit they always trying to do, which is to fuck people over and benefit corporations, which is not to say Obamacare didn't do some of that anyway. But let's see here. What do we have that this was going to do? It would have repealed tax penalties for people without health insurance. Okay. Rolled back federal insurance standards, which we know that's exactly what we need. Getting rid of standards which the corporations love and the Republicans always love to do. Reduce subsidies for the purchase of private insurance, which is just fucking spectacular. Screw poor people again. Set new limits on spending for Medicaid, once again fucking mostly poor people and older people without much of an income, which is the federal state program that covers more than 70 million low-income people, like I just said. It repealed hundreds of billions of dollars in taxes imposed by the Affordable Care Act, and would have also cut off federal funds to Planned Parenthood for 1 year, which I'm sure would have gone forward after 1 year, because they just hate Planned Parenthood so much. But anyway, so let me read this as well. Mr. Ryan has said that the bill included huge conservative wins, quote, but it never won over conservatives who won a more thorough eradication of the Affordable Care Act, nor did it have the backing of more moderate Republicans who were anxiously aware of the CBO's assessment that the bill would leave 24 million more Americans without insurance in 2024, compared with the number who would be uninsured under the current law. So, of course, then it also says the budget office, CBO, also warned that in the short run, the Republicans' legislation would drive insurance premiums higher. For older Americans approaching retirement, the cost of insurance could have risen sharply. It's great. I mean, they fell apart. Two different factions of the Republican Party, the establishment and the fucking Tea Party people again. They couldn't agree, and they brought Paul Ryan in because they thought he could do something to get, everybody together. No, he can't do it either. These Tea Party fuck asses always fucking shit up. Well, they screwed themselves on this one, and I love it. I love it. So, needless to say, I'm really happy about it. They probably lost the midterms. Hopefully, the world won't burn down before the midterms. Of course, you never know, but this is at least one step in the agenda of getting rid of their bullshit. They said basically that it's dead for the foreseeable future, and it's probably not going anywhere. So, awesome news, which we need nowadays, actually. I also wanted to mention that I got a new review from Zachrilege. Of course, my friend who accompanied me to NanoCon, and I've been on his show. He's been on my show, and we love each other so much. So he says, I've listened to Chris for a long time, and this show really is a great step in the right direction. If you're tired of atheists bashing on religion podcasts, this is your choice. Chris has talked about the prison system, sexual assault in the military, and polyamory. Give him a listen. You will not be disappointed. So thanks a lot, Zach. I have to apologize, incidentally, for the sound of my voice. Allergies have been kicking my ass, and it has affected my speaking voice. So the usual sexy Southern accent is somewhat diminished because of it. So my apologies. And thank you to Zach for that brilliant review. I really appreciate it. This week in the palaver, I have a gentleman who I've known for quite a while. Even though we disconnected for a good little while, we reconnected a couple years ago. My friend Erik Pelham. He'll be talking about his journey through addiction and how he beat it, basically. So his story is fascinating. He's a great storyteller, I have to say, but it's also very harrowing. And I would warn some people who might be sensitive to these things to consider that before listening to the palaver this week. So I hope y'all enjoy the rest of the show.
Do you want to live in a world where ignorance rules? Ignorance would have you believe that the world is a terrifying place, ruled by an unknowable and invisible force that demands your love upon pain of eternal torture. Ignorance would have you believe that the sun is a horse-drawn chariot, the earth is flat, and that faith, the evidence of things not seen, is a virtue. Ignorance would have you believe the South is filled only with ignorant rednecks who've never worn shoes, and that it is a dangerous place for the open-minded to visit and live. Ignorance would have you believe a lot of things. Ignorance is wrong. Reason has been working hard to make life better for all Americans and humanity across the globe since before the discovery of fire. Reason wants a better life for you and for your family. Reason helped Ignaz Semmelweis discover in 1847 that hand washing could help prevent the transmission of disease, saving countless lives. In 1944, Reason helped Grace Hopper and Howard Aiken develop the Mark I computer. Reason took us to the moon, gave us all supercomputers in our pockets, and allows amputees to walk again through prosthetic technology. Reason has done all of this and has never accepted a cent in compensation. Reason reaches across the aisles to help those with faith make morally sound judgments and helps us all change our own worldview when new evidence is brought to light. Reason helps us all. Ignorance is wrong for America and wrong for the world. This 2017, make your voice heard by telling ignorance it is totally wrong for you and the world by making Reason your chosen philosophy. And buy your tickets now for ReasonCon 3. Join us and our speakers and champions of Reason, Lawrence Krauss, Matt Dillahunty, Aaron Ra, Callie Wright, Jim Craig, and Emily Templewood. Also a whole lot of your favorite podcasters, as well as your new friends, old friends, and those unmet in a celebration of all that is reasonable. Join us in helping to put reason back in the driver's seat of America and the world.
ReasonCon 3 will be held in Hickory, North Carolina on April 21st and 22nd, 2017. Please get your tickets at reasonnc.com. That's reasonnc.com.
I'm Miss B. Haven, and I approve this message.
Brewpubs have always been a place to sit back, have a few drinks with friends, and talk about everything under the sun. Skeptics Brewpub is just such a place. Each week, Brother Brewer invites people to come in and talk about politics, religion, skeptical inquiry, beer, geekdom, and whatever else happens to come up that night. You can join the conversation by chat each Monday night at 8:30 p.m. Central Time on Spreaker, or catch the show later on iTunes, Spreaker, Google Play, or any other podcatchers out there. That's Skeptics Brewpub, where nothing is sacred and no conversation starts without a 2-drink minimum.
Welcome to another edition of the Palaver here on the Podunk Polymath Podcast. This week I have a gentleman with me who I first met 20-some-odd years ago. We lost touch, but we reconnected on Facebook a couple years ago. And he's here to talk to me about a subject that he is well acquainted with and affects millions of people in this country. So, welcome, Erik Pelham. How you doing, Erik?
I'm doing good, brother. How you doing?
Hanging in there. I actually spoke to you on the old podcast, and we discussed your days in the Seventh-day Adventism or whatever the fuck.
My upbringing in the Adventist religion, yes.
Yeah, and that was fun times, you know, as talking about religions always is. I have you on this time for a different purpose, but first of all, why don't you tell the listening audience who you are and kind of how we know each other?
Well, my name's Erik, as Chris said, and we met each other in college a long time ago, and I think probably the most salient detail we can add at this point is that we did sleep together at one point. And I mean sleep. We didn't actually do anything. It was very boring. But we were sort of two dysfunctional peas in an even more dysfunctional pod down in that area of Alabama. And we quickly gravitated towards each other just because of the I don't even know how to describe it. Just the morass of stupidity. Is that a?
Yeah, the morass of moronic.
Mm-hmm.
Moronic.
And we just clicked immediately. We both had a passion for books and reading and literature, and I think that was the class we originally met in, was a writing class or an English, something like that.
It was English 101.
Yeah, and it was, we've just, and then when we lost contact and we reconnected like 20 some odd years later, it was like, we didn't miss a beat. And that's when somebody's actually a friend, is when you can just pick up where you left off. So I've always, just deeply hated you and felt like you were a cancer that needed to be removed from humanity. But other than that, pretty well.
I have similar feelings towards you, and it burns brightly within me.
It's why I'm here.
Exactly. So I had you on because you kind of had some, and I know this is putting it a bit mildly, you had some struggles with addiction.
Yeah, funny that we the first time we talked about my religious upbringing, because that laid the groundwork for what became a very drug and alcohol addled 20s. And that's something I think that I think there's a lot of reasons that people become addicts. I think that some people, the majority of people are some varied level of damage, and then they start seeking some sort of way of either anesthetizing themselves against the pain of whatever it was, whether it was a single trauma or a series of them, maybe a series of even milder traumas over time that created, levels of scar tissue that create pain. And then I think people seek to anesthetize themselves. I think there's other people that have a relatively functional upbringing and then sort of stumble into drugs and become physically addicted to them and then can't control that anymore. I think that there's no, personally, and from what I can, see, what I've seen and read about, the world of addiction, there's not like a single thing you can put your finger on and say this causes addiction, because that same, stimulus or trauma or whatever in one person won't cause addiction in another person. So you can't say that thing causes addiction, and you can't say that there's only one thing that causes addiction. I think that it's a spectrum, just like everything, and people fall on it in different places for different reasons. And so that's, and I think if you take that into consideration, I think that's why the, success rate of various different rehab systems reflects the diversity of the causes of it, because there's not a system that works for everybody. Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, they lay claim to numbers that they just simply cannot back up. And the most objective studies of them say that they have the same recidivism rate that pretty much any reasonable, addiction program does. So there's not really like a successful plan that works for everybody, just like there's not because they all got into addiction for different reasons. You can't expect one solution to get them all out of addiction. It's all a very, getting into addiction and then getting back out of it. It's all a very personal experience. And that's what, that was definitely my experience of it on both ends. And I think that if that more of that idea, that approach was used, you'd probably see a better success rate, just because you're not trying to use a blanket, and it's easy to throw the 12 steps under the bus. A lot of it well deserved, but you can't take a 12-step program and say this is going to work for everybody. You can say it has obviously worked for some people, but it definitely does not work for everybody. It was not how I got sober.
Yeah, and that's actually something I was going to discuss later on, but of course you can't just fucking let shit go. You gotta keep running your fucking because I actually looked up secular alternatives to 12 AA, and it's because I already know AA's had problems and shit, like you already said. But first of all, I wanted to read some statistics I found, just to lay a kind of a groundwork of what we're talking about here. Now, these statistics are fairly recent. I think they're about 5 years old, but I mean, it gives a good indicator. It says 20 million Americans over the age of 12 have an addiction. 100 people die each day from drug overdoses. 5 million emergency room visits, and this is 2011. 2.6 million people with addictions have a dependence on both alcohol and illicit drugs. 9.4 million reported DUIs and drugs. 6.8 million people with an addiction have a mental illness. Over 9% of those with an addiction began drinking, smoking, or using illicit drugs before the age of 18. So these are some general statistics about addiction. There's about heroin and cocaine as well, but I'll put the links up. But that's just kind of giving an overview. It's a pretty widespread problem.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's I remember one time I was at a family reunion and my grandfather, he said something dismissive and flippant about, drug addiction being basically a plague on the marginalized. He didn't use those words, obviously, but something like that. And I remember I was irate because, of course I was one of those. But I said to him, you'd be astounded at how many people at your Baptist church are addicted to prescription drugs. And he was like, he dismissed it. But when you start taking into consideration like any statistical models that they have for trying to assess the levels of addiction and everything, one thing you have to realize is they haven't even scraped the tip of the iceberg what we call a functioning addict. So and there's different levels of functioning, but there are high functioning addicts. There are people who are chemically addicted to drugs, illicit and legal, but they're addicted, but they function in life because they can control their addiction. It's not an uncontrolled thing. And just entering into the realm of it doesn't necessarily mean that the wheels are going to come off and you're going to wind up homeless, pushing a shopping cart around toothless, asking for change because you can't remember your name from 1 hour to the next. That's not actually the norm. That's abnormal. That's an extreme component of the addict world. There are certain drugs that when you do get into them, they certainly invite that behavior at a higher level. But even heroin's probably one of the best examples of an illicit drug that it's possible and even likely to be you can be a relatively high functioning level of heroin addict. Heroin was when I got into heroin, for instance, I had read a lot of William Burroughs. Okay. So I had this, and he has this, it's a short essay he wrote, and it's a letter to drugs from a master addict is the name of this essay that he wrote. And he talks a lot about addiction, and he talks a lot about his heroin addiction. He was a heroin and morphine addict for over 30 years on and off. And he lived into his 80s. And so you can't say, and he was a successful writer, so you can't say that even somebody who took it to the extreme he did was your sort of typical addict. Your typical destructive addict. He was a functioning addict. And heroin, for sure, is one of those drugs that if you take even a measure of taking care of yourself, you can function on that stuff forever. Take another extreme drug like methamphetamines, crystal meth. One of the problems with that drug is that it takes away your appetite. It's an appetite suppressant. And it keeps you awake. Well, you combine those two things, and you don't have to be on drugs, but if you quit eating and quit sleeping, in 3 days, you're going to be a babbling lunatic. And so when you take a drug that then makes you feel euphoric while you're losing your mind because you're not sleeping or eating properly, then the wheels come off pretty quick with a drug like that. But the actual damage, a lot of the damage from that drug comes from the fact that you're not eating and sleeping properly. With heroin, on the other hand, sleep's not a problem. But you have to remember to eat properly. One of the side effects of heroin is constipation. Any kind of true opiate, you're going to have extreme, you can't have extreme constipation. I mean, William Burroughs.
Go watch Train Spotting.
Yeah, William Burroughs has my favorite phrase for that. He said, you need the surgical equivalent of an apple corer. And so if you take the measure to make sure that you're eating the kind of food that helps you stay unconstipated and you're sleeping properly and keeping a schedule, you could be a functioning heroin addict for years. Now, is that a healthy? I don't think so, but there are people that do it. So when you start talking about addiction, you have to also define, what are you talking about? Are you talking about specifically destructive addiction? Or are you talking about just chemical dependence on a substance that's other than just normal food? You know, so I think most people, when they're talking about addiction, are talking about destructive addiction. And so if you want to talk about that, that's kind of a specific type of conversation to have about addiction. Because when I was in heroin, for instance, I kept heroin at arm's length because I didn't want to get that addicted. The only thing I was ever seriously addicted to was alcohol and tobacco. And I had to kick pills a couple of times because I got a little too down that rabbit hole. But I was always like, as soon as I would start doing one thing for a while, I would immediately go after a couple of weeks. I'd be like, all right, I need to switch off and do something else for a while, because I don't want to be addicted to one thing. And heroin was something I took great pains to stay at arm's length to. I traveled a lot. So one of the things I would do is when we would get to a new town, I always found a job, some sort of construction work. And I would stay there we usually stay somewhere for anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks was where we would sort of hang out, sometimes a few months, sometimes less. But I would wait until we were within 2 weeks of leaving town before I found a dealer for heroin. And then I would find a dealer. I'd start doing it, get to where I was, using a little bit and tried not to do it every day, but then kind of did there towards the end. And then we'd pack up one day and just leave town. So I was not like by myself in the woods for 3 days while I detoxed, kind of addicted. I would have a couple of restless nights and then that'd be it.
Let's back up a little bit.
Okay.
I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole. So, first of all, but you said something about prescription drugs. I wanted to mention right quick that there was actually something on here about that. It says overdoses by painkillers are more common than heroin and cocaine overdoses combined. And the sale of painkillers has increased like 300% since 99, and that was in 2011, so I'm sure it's gone higher since then. So that's definitely a problem. I also wanted to say that here in Tennessee, I know for a fact that people are switching to heroin because they got addicted to like OxyContin and oxycodone, and they switched to heroin because it's cheaper apparently to get heroin than it is to get these pills. The availability is better for heroin, which I find that's crazy to me. I don't know. Prescription drugs to me are a lot more harmful in a lot of ways than regular drugs or illicit drugs, I guess you could say.
Well, yes and no. The availability to your average Joe, you know. So like if you're just a normal lower middle class working person that has a decent healthcare plan at all, or a healthcare plan at all, you're going to have access to prescription drugs, period. The thing about prescription drugs, though, is they are regulated. So when you take a 10 milligram oxycodone or whatever, you know you're getting an exact amount of the drug. The problem with illicit drugs, especially heroin, is you don't know what you're getting. And every time your dealer gets a new batch, or you get with a new dealer or whatever, you get a new source, or you have to make sure that you're testing the quantity that you're using little bits at a time until you get a feel for what the potency of that particular batch is. Because you might be used to doing, 2/3 of a syringe, almost a cc of one type. And then if you loaded that much up of something this other guy's selling over here, you die. You know what I mean? Like, it's that big of a difference. And one of the things that, this is how, psychotic drug addicts can be, is in street culture, when someone dies of a heroin overdose, that dealer will usually get a bunch of new business because people think, oh, he's got the good stuff because I know this guy over here, and he was a seasoned addict and he didn't kill himself. So if he died accidentally, so this guy's heroin, it must be the good stuff. So then they would flock over. Well, one of the things that heroin dealers will do to drum up business is they'll drop what they call a hot load. And it'll be like rat poison or something. And then somebody will die. And then everybody will be like, oh, man, he must have the good stuff. So they'll all flock over there to him. That's actually not a practice in the illicit drug world, especially where there's lots of addicts, like in a place like Salt Lake City, Utah, for instance. Back in the late 90s, they were having a heroin epidemic. Seattle always has a lot of heroin. San Francisco is a big heroin town. So is Denver, Colorado. And in those type of areas where they've got huge numbers of addicts and there's competition amongst dealers, that's not an uncommon practice.
So let's start at the beginning. Let's kind of backtrack. How did Mr. Pelham kind of get started?
Well, when I left home, I was leaving a physically and psychologically abusive environment, and I went into the Marines, and I was 17 years old. So I get into the Marines, and I quickly got to areas where, even if it wasn't necessarily legal for us to buy booze, it was easy for us to get, because, if you had one Marine in the barracks that was over the age of 21, everybody could get booze. It was just get that guy to buy it for you. So alcohol was definitely my entree into that world. And I was back and forth with it, during the 4 years. I would consider my time in the Marines, I was a relatively high functioning addict, mostly an abusive drinker. I would just drink to blackout level drunk. But then I might not drink for a week or so. But then when I did drink, it was usually pretty gnarly. And then when I got out of the Marines, I had worked up by the time I met you, I was drinking pretty regularly. Like when we would get together and drink beer, I was drinking like that every night, like almost pretty much every night. Then I had one of my first sort of bottoming out experiences as an adult post-Marine days. I got arrested up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama on spring break of, was it 94? Yeah. I'd gone up there to reunite with some of my Marine buddies. We got drunk, and I got in a fight. We got picked up by the local police, and we had to sleep it off in the cooler. And that was sort of the beginning of my fall, I guess you would say, because it was just a series of just sort of bouncing and bouncing and bouncing down until I finally bottomed out when I was like 29. So it was over about a 6 or 7 year period that things really just spiraled down. And at the time, my mindset was, I remember having this thought many times of, let's just see how much abuse this body can take before I die. And I just figured at some point I'm going to die, or I'll wind up in prison or whatever, but probably I will die at some point. I just had accepted that. And it wasn't until actually just a couple of years ago that I really began to see the reasons for all of that. But at the time, there was just this. So one of the things that happens is this concept of spiraling out of control. So, and it's this self-feeding process. So if you have this initial like, ugh, this sucks, I want to drink. Okay, so you have a drink. Well, if you keep doing that, the drinking is going to create more things that suck. Your life's going to start to suck, especially as you become more of a dysfunctional addict. There's going to be more problems. You got more drama. You've got, more issues. You start to neglect more things, which create more problems, which makes you want to drink more, which, yada, 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 round and round and round. You get arrested, you spend the weekend in jail, you lose your job, you want another drink, and it's just this, it's a spiral that just seems to sling you further and further and further out of control. And that's usually when the destructive type of addict becomes, I guess you could say, born in that sort of self-defeating, just, self-sabotaging cycle of spiraling down and out of control. And for me, that took because I would start to spiral out, and then I'd start to bottom out, and then I'd kind of pull it together enough to function for a little while, and then I'd start to spiral out again, and then I'd bottom out a little bit again, and every time I did that, I was bottoming out a little bit more. It was a little bit harder. It was a little bit worse. I think, didn't you drive me from like Memphis to Nashville or something one time when was that you?
I don't think that was me, no.
Yeah, this was when I was running, like I was doing heavy into cocaine and pills and, a bunch of stuff. But so anyway, I started drinking. The alcohol was and then somebody introduced me to weed. It was that was about the time I left Alabama. I kind of started getting into weed a little bit. But at first, I was actually thinking about this the other day, and I was laughing about it. At first, I was like, I remember telling a friend of mine at the time, man, we got to be careful with this stuff. It's addictive, And yeah. And so I was literally like rationing joints. Like we only smoke on weekends. We got to be careful with this stuff. And obviously that didn't last very long. And then not long after that, when I started getting into weed, I did LSD for the first time. And I actually credit LSD and hallucinogens, the hallucinogenic family of drugs as a whole, for actually helping me make it through the next few years after I started doing everything. Because that was the one thing I could get high on that actually made me feel more connected with reality, ironically. Because it doesn't take you out of it in this blackout state. You know what I mean? Like if you've ever done hallucinogens, like especially LSD, you can basically drink all night long and you don't really get drunk. The alcohol doesn't really affect you. And I'm not just saying that. That's actually everybody who's ever done LSD will tell you that. And so there was the sort of mental clarity that came from the post-trip period for the next couple of days that would sort of help me stay tuned in with what was actually real about the universe, not necessarily about Earth, but what was real about the microcosm and the macrocosm and the Undean thing, the duality of the reality of things, and all of that was always made manifest to me through hallucinogens. So for me, doing that actually kept my mind together, ironically. And then from the hallucinogens, at that point, it wasn't long until I was like, somebody, at some point it was the pills that was the next thing. I tried pills, and then, pills and alcohol. Oh boy. And then at one point, I remember I lost 3 weeks one time. Yeah, I just don't remember anything for 3 weeks. Like I remember we were in Florida. I started drinking one day and we did some pills. And the next thing I know, we were in Tennessee and it was 3 weeks later. I have no idea what took place during that 3 weeks. and I have a vague recollection of being on a rowboat in a lake somewhere, but no idea what state or country, even for that matter, I might have been in. But that was the pills. Pills and alcohol, especially together, man, that's a bad combination. That's a really bad combination. That's the kind of stuff that accidentally kills people. You know, a lot of people that overdose aren't overdosing intentionally. It's just a poor choice of combinations of things that create a bad chemical imbalance in the body that causes you to die. And then once I got into the pills, it wasn't long after that then, you know, if you're doing pills and somebody offers you cocaine, well, what the hell? I mean, why not? At this point, why are you saying no? You know? And so I tried I tried coke before I tried anything like meth or anything like that. And then, you know, you try coke, and then one day you meet somebody that knows how to cook crack up out of coke, and you smoke some crack. And, you know, that was always, to me, like uppers were fun, but what I really liked was the downers. I was a heroin person, you know, like that. If you gave me my drug of choice, was always downers. But like I said, I made sure I mixed it up enough that I was never really, you know, like when I lost that 3 weeks on pills, I quit doing pills for like a year after that. You know, I wasn't interested. The one thread that ran through the whole thing was booze. And I kind of classify marijuana as a mild hallucinogen. I think that smoking pot probably is one of the things that actually helped keep me alive through that time, because it mellows you out enough that, because I have, you know, on top of everything else, I had very violent tendencies and a lot of explosive anger and stuff like that. Well, pot helped mellow that out. And so that, you know, and whereas alcohol fires that up, you know, so when alcohol was firing me up, if I could smoke a joint, it would help mellow that back down, which kept me out of situations that might have gotten me killed. And then once I started into the coke, I was running coke, you know, around and selling it to people to pay for what I was doing, because coke is super expensive. It's easy to get into hundreds of dollars a day habit. Like, it's not hard at all. And this is I won't name the city because I don't want to out anybody, but there was one particular stop on my sort of circuit through the South there where I was selling drugs, where one of the guys that so what I would do is I would show up in a little town or community, and I had a few friends around, and I would stay with a friend, and then they would call all their drug using friends that were like, hey, this friend of mine's in town and he's got a bunch of pills and cocaine and LSD and all this other stuff. Why don't you come over and we'll party? And then I would sell them drugs, and then we would all party together. And that's basically what I did. I just sort of drifted around and did that for 6 or 8 months, you know. And this one guy that did this actually ran an herb store and a health food store. And his apartment was upstairs from this. And he was the one who showed me how to cook crack. And we would, he had a doorbell on his store so that he didn't have to actually be in the store all the time, because he lived upstairs, and the bell would ring upstairs. And we would be up in his room with aluminum foil taped over the windows to block the light out. And we would just smoke crack for 2 and 3 days up in his room, up in his apartment upstairs. And like had a little peepholes and stuff cut where you get all freaked out, and you'd be looking out the peephole, watching people walk by and stuff. And then occasionally some like little old lady from the local town or whatever would ring the bell to like come down and buy her ginkgo or whatever the fuck it was that she was buying. And he would go down there high as batshit on crack, fucking cocaine, and talk to people about herbs and the holistic lifestyle and this other bullshit. And we were literally crackheads that were selling herbs to old ladies. Like it was.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a nonstop source of amusement to us at the time as well. But crack was never really my thing. I just was like, yeah, it's great, but it was such a fast high. I mean, literally minutes later, you'd be like, okay, I'm ready for more. And whereas heroin, man, you do a load and you're good for 8 hours. Like you're done. Like that's it. And then, you know, and up and through this time, I was still very vociferously against heroin. I would tell people I don't want that shit around me, you know, because I know it sounds silly to somebody who's never been a drug addict for me to be smoking crack and talking about how bad heroin is for you. And it is kind of silly, but it was for me in my mind, heroin was Mordor. You know what I mean? Like it was that final like place. And I guess I just, in my mind, I was just telling myself like, no, you got to stay away from Mordor, right? You anything else you can survive, but that's the one thing, you know, that until you're really ready to check out, don't go there. And then it finally one day was just like, I'd gotten into smoking opium. And by this time, once you smoked opium and crack and freebase coke, and, you know, I've literally at this point done everything. I was like, you know, all right, well, I may as well do this too. And then the first time I did heroin, I smoked it. And then a guy told me, he was like, you know, you're wasting heroin if you're doing anything but shooting it up. And at this point, I had also just on a personal level just spiraled down to the point where I was just like, I can honestly say that at this point in my life, I didn't care. On my best days, I didn't care if I lived or died. And on my worst days, I wanted to die. So doing heroin was just a natural, like, fucking why not, man, you know? And so I remember the first time I, you know, cooked up and loaded up and shot it up, I was in Salt Lake City. And I had this sort of, I don't really believe in like out of the body experiences or whatever, but I had this, I was able to clearly see myself in that moment squatting down in this alley, you know, shooting up. And there was this part of my brain that was like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? You know, like, what the fuck are you doing here? But, and that's something I'd like to also just that sort of sense of awareness. I call it the driver. It's the seat of your identity. It's who you are most fundamentally in your deepest part of your mind. And that part of me was always aware that these were just drugs. I did 15 hits of acid one time. And I watched this tree line just it was nighttime, and we were in this little amphitheater out in the woods by ourselves. It was an actual amphitheater where people performed, but there was just nobody around at the time, and we were camping on the stage. So I'm sitting on the stage looking out over this natural amphitheater with trees, you know, out on the edges of it. And I'm watching these trees just start turning into piles of dinosaurs and dragons that are writhing all around each other and stuff as they swayed in the breeze, you know. And even then, I just remember having this, like, you know, inner awareness that I was just tripping. I've done hundreds of trips on hallucinogens, and I can honestly say I've never had a bad trip. Because I never freaked out, even as much as I did. I've never had a freak out moment on any drug, because there was always, and I don't know why, that part of my mind stayed together, because I've watched other people lose it. I mean, I've actually been looking twice in my life. I've been looking somebody in the eye and just watched something snap inside them. And they were never the same again, both times. And I don't know why that never happened to me, because I was doing as much, if not more, than most people around me. I kind of credit it mostly with the fact that I didn't get into drugs until I was like 23 years old. So my brain, just on a physiological level, my brain was not developing anymore. You know what I mean? Like, it had actually like set. Because I think nowadays they're saying that your brain, just on a physiological level, it doesn't actually take its sort of final form and set as a solid thing, more or less, until you're about 20, 21 years old. And so if you start doing these kind of hard drugs prior to that event in your life, I think the effects on your brain and on your mind are dramatically different. So for me, I think one of the reasons why I managed to more or less keep it together through all that pretty extensive and extreme abuse was that my brain wasn't being treated like that in its developing phases. I was treating it like that as a full adult brain. So it had a sort of sense, and plus I'd been through some things in the Marines and stuff like that, there was a part of my brain that was used to holding on under extreme duress and in extreme situations. So combine those, that's kind of more or less what I credit that sort of maintaining my sanity through that. But I've done I've eaten like a quarter of an ounce of mushrooms before. I've done peyote. I've done, you name it, ketamine, all of it. And I never wasn't aware that I was just high. It was a very bizarre thing, because I've talked to a lot of people that have done this and they're like, really? Always? Like even when you did peyote? And I was like, I was sitting in the woods up in Oregon on peyote, but I was flying over the desert somewhere in the Southwest as a mountain lion was explaining the nature of reality to me and flying next to me in the sky. But there was, even in that experience, there was a part of me that was just like, you're just tripping. Like it's just the peyote. So I kind of credit the hallucinogens for helping maintain that part of my mind. It actually, I'm not going to say, that's what I credit it to. Science may have something different to say. I don't recommend doing 15 hits of acid. Let me just put that out there. It's not going to help you stay sane. Most people have a vastly different reaction to that level of drug abuse than what I did. I'm the exception, not the rule, to that level of extreme drug abuse. So don't take this as like, anybody who's listening, don't take this as like an invitation or me encouraging you to pursue such a path. I've seen people die. I nearly have overdosed myself several times. It's not a good path. Trust me. I like to think I've maintained some sanity through it.
Some.
Yeah, let's don't give it too much credit though.
So you've done everything.
Well, there are some stuff out there now, some designer drug stuff out there now, and there were some designer drugs back then that I didn't do. But yeah, most of your like hard street level drugs that were in any availability, I've done it. In the words of Hunter S. Thompson, I've done every drug known to man since 1844 AD.
So where was your when did you hit the rock bottom, bottom?
Well, like I said, that was a series of rock bottom experiences that took place over a few years. But the last time that I had a drink or any kind of drug was in September of 2000. And I was in Reno, Nevada, which is a fucking shithole. And actually, that show Reno 911 accurately portrays the locals in Reno. Not necessarily the cops, but the just trailer trash that's constantly in the background. That's Reno, Nevada, without a doubt. But the casinos were there, and that was my reason for being there. I had a girlfriend at the time who was a compulsive gambler that did not use drugs or alcohol, and I was a alcoholic drug addict who wasn't so much into gambling, but we made a great team. And so she would take us to the casinos while she compulsively gambled all her money away. And I would drink free booze in the casinos. And I wound up getting arrested several times in Tahoe and Reno. And the details of the events of the last evening, I'm gonna sort of go slowly so that because I don't want to reveal too much. There are people that I still care about that were involved in that night, and I don't want to put anybody on blast. I got ripping drunk, like obliterated, blackout level drunk. Imagined a sequence of events happening. It didn't happen the way I wanted it to. I viciously beat two people. The girl I was dating at the time had the sense to divert my attention with some free drink tickets and asked me to go downstairs in the hotel because we were up in a room. So she asked me to go downstairs to get them some drinks. And I was like, in my junky brain was like, oh, free drinks. And I snatched the tickets and I quit beating people and I left the room and go down. And I can't even imagine what I looked like to the security guys when I went to cash these, because I'm in my jeans and T-shirt and shoes, but I've got blood on me and I probably look like a deranged lunatic. And then I get back upstairs and she had just used the drink tickets to get me out of the room so they could lock me out. And then I tried kicking the door in, and you can't really kick hotel doors in despite what you may see on TV. And then I remembered that I had a 4-inch lock blade knife in my pocket with a 4-inch blade on it. And thankfully, for many reasons, I had, in my blackout mind, forgotten that it was in my pocket when I was in the room prior to this, and it was beating on people, because at that point I certainly would have taken it out and used it. And I remembered I had it, so I took it out and I tried using the knife to get in the room. That wasn't working. And so I sat down on the floor and I actually started cutting on myself. And I was seriously beginning to consider it like opening a vein. Like I was going to try to slit my wrist. And I don't know anybody who's ever tried to do that. I have to say, probably in that moment, I wanted to be dead as much as I've ever wanted to be dead. Let me put it like that. But I was in the process of cutting myself, and I actually had made a few cuts, but they were like hesitation cuts because I was having a hard time making myself cut myself. I don't know how else to describe it. It's very unnatural to do that to yourself. And I was working my way up towards overriding your natural aversion for doing such a thing when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. When I looked down the hallway, I saw a guy in a blazer coming down the hallway towards me, and I could tell he was security. And I see him reach towards his hip, and he says, "Hey, what you got in your hand there?" or something like that. And I said, he was like, why don't you put that down? And I'm sitting there stabbing this knife into the floor, like the point of it. And I'm sort of staring off, and I remember thinking, what should I do here? This guy's going to fuck up my program. Because I was seriously like, if you just leave me alone, I'll finish what I started right. He won't have to worry about me. Like, that's what I was thinking. But I'm like, I need to get rid of him so I can finish this. So I jumped up and I swiped at him with the knife. And apparently I did nick him a little bit. And he was an off-duty cop who was working security for the hotel, and he'd already called for backup. So about that time, a bunch of uniforms came swarming down the hall and took me down, got the knife away from me, thankfully. They were none too gentle, as you can imagine. And rightfully so. Nothing that the cops did to me for the rest of that evening, that night, and the next morning was not well deserved. I was belligerent, and I fought back a lot that night. By this time by the time the cops had shown up, I was starting to I was out of my blackout, and I was starting to kind of sober up, because we're talking about hours have passed now since my last drink. And they got me cuffed, carried me downstairs, threw me into a paddy wagon. And when they got me down to the city jail there in Reno, I think it's actually, was it Washoe County or whatever? I came out of the back of that paddy wagon, and I have one of the dubious honors. I have I picked one of the traits I have the dubious honor of having is that I used to be able, when my hands were cuffed behind me, I could slip them under my butt and then pull my feet up through the cuffs, and then I have my hands cuffed in front of me. And I had done that in the back of this paddy wagon, and when they opened the back of the doors, I just jumped out. And they had shackles on my legs, too, but I just jumped out and punched at the nearest cop. I don't know that I actually hit him. But now we're out of the public view. We're at the jail, and it's nothing but me and these cops. And let's just say that my arms did wind up behind me again. I had, the next morning when I woke up I was actually in a padded cell, and I was still handcuffed and I was still shackled, and they had put a cloth bag over my head because they had maced me several times. And when you get maced, your mucous membranes really start to overwork. And so I was using the phlegm and mucus that was coming out from the mace to spit on them, and they have a cloth linen bag that they can put over your head that allows you to breathe but doesn't allow mucus to fly out of your face to them. It's for their protection. And I woke up the next morning, still had that bag on my head, still handcuffed and still shackled, was horribly beaten. Both of my shoulders were I still have trouble with especially my right shoulder. I had a crushed nerve in my wrist from the handcuffs. I didn't feel anything in my index finger and thumb for like a month and a half after this incident that night. And when I came to, I was laying on my side with my arms were numb, my legs were numb because I'd been laying still without, moving around. And one of the ways to tell when that you have a problem is that, like, when I come to in those situations, I had a standard protocol for how to react. Like, it had happened enough where I had woke up like, holy shit, something went horribly wrong last night. I had it was like a response protocol. Like, I would lay still as I came to, and I would start scanning myself from the inside out, check the vitals, heart, lungs, abdomen, brain, nothing major there. Take a breath, see if I had any broken ribs, and then just start doing an analysis. And this morning, without the morning in question, it was just like, oh shit, that's not good. Oh yeah, that's not good. As I was going to these different spots in my body, I could tell things were not good. And I couldn't feel parts of myself, and that's always a bad sign. So I sort of sat up and leaned up against the wall. That's when I realized that I was actually in a padded cell, because I could feel padding on the wall behind me. You got to keep in mind, I had the bag on my head. I can't see anything. I can see light because it's sort of a yellowish colored linen. It was, but I couldn't really see anything. And then I hear the door open after, I don't know how long. Well, before I heard the door open, I had a moment where I sort of was like, after I scanned, I was able to sit up enough to lean against the wall, and I just had this, I wasn't in so much pain yet, but I had this very vivid awareness that I was at some point going to be in excruciating pain. Like, at some point it's going to set in. This is not going to be good. And I started wondering, then after I got, my body was like, all right, well, it's going to hurt, but I'm obviously intact and I'm alive. So what the fuck happened? Like, then my brain started trying to recall what happened. And I remember at first it just started coming to me and just, sort of flash still images of just, some of the scenes from the night before. And I was like, oh no, I remember just, oh no. And as I was thinking more, I started rocking my head back and forth, and I started hitting that padded cell wall with my head. And a brilliant idea came to me, like, well, maybe you can hit your head against this padded wall hard enough to knock yourself back out so you don't have to think about this anymore. So I did that, and it worked. And then when I came to again, because I heard the door open, and I heard several cops talking as they came into the room. Still can't see shit, right? Because I got this bag on my head. And so I sat up, and I leaned against the wall, and I figured, well, they're probably coming in to finish what they started last night. And I just hear this cop say, is this the psycho ex-Marine? And another guy said, yeah. And then the guy kind of kicked my foot. He was like, hey, you going to give us any trouble? And I was like, no, I don't think you have anything to worry about. Like I can't feel my arms or my legs from around the ankles to my feet, so I can't really do anything. So they actually strapped me into this like a cross between a gurney and a wheelchair, and strapped my arms and legs down so I couldn't fight back. And they took me to the infirmary, and I got stitched up. And they bandaged up all of the nicks and cuts that didn't need stitches, gave me some injected antibiotics because I had, there were multiple people's blood on me and my clothes. It was hard to tell where my blood stopped and some other people started. I only got 20 something stitches on that particular occasion, but it was, in a few different spots. Most of them were cuts I had inflicted on myself with that knife. And after they processed me in the infirmary, I kept saying, if you just leave me alone and let me die. I said that several times through the course of them trying to help me. And in the course of all of that, they decided that they were going to keep me as a possible threat to myself and other people. And they took me to the Nevada Mental Health Institute. And they kept me there for 72 hours under watch. And one of the most fucked up things in this whole story wasn't even really about me. It was when Nevada, they kept asking me, what is your plan when you get out? And let me back up. The 3-day stay in the Nevada Mental Health Institute was the best gift I've ever been given, because I sat there for 2 days and was like, okay, what am I going to do? Am I going to get out of here and finish what I started the other night? Or am I going to pull myself out of this hole? But either way, I'm either, getting on the proverbial straight and narrow, or I'm going to finish what I started. But I am definitely not continuing as I was. And that was and just that knowledge that it was just A or B. Just pick one. But you got to get on with one or the other. But there's no more of this dancing around the issue. And there was a point at the beginning of the 3rd day where I had this, that part of myself that I call the driver I had this experience where I was having this interchange with that aspect of myself in my mind. And that part of me said to the rest of me, well, what's it going to be, fuckface? You talk a lot of shit about how tough you are and, how much abuse you can take and all this. But really, like, you're thinking about shirking this challenge. I mean, think about where you are right now. You just beat up the last 2 people on this planet that would have called you friend. You haven't spoken to your family in 3 years. You don't have any money. You don't have a job. And as far as you know right now, the only material possessions on this planet you possess are encrustulated in your own blood, probably in a biohazard bag back at the jail. You have nothing except these clothes that they gave you out of the charity box at the Mental Health Institute. That's all you have. And you're probably looking at felony charges, probably jail time. And from where you are right now, everything, it just looks like this dark black abyss that you don't have any idea really how to start trying to climb out of. Are you up for that? And there was a part of me in that moment when I was challenged with this like seemingly hopeless challenge, right? There was a part of me that was like, well, that's something. to try. You know, at this point, that would be quite an accomplishment to crawl out of where you are right now, you know. And that was the beginning of the ember that I sort of blew back to life. Like, that was the moment where I was like, all right, well, fuck it. Let's see. At least commit to yourself that you're not going to drink for the next few weeks and just see how things play out. And I thought, all right, I can do that. I've quit drinking before, so. And then immediately I decided, no matter what, I'm not going to drink for the rest of my life. Okay, if I do get out of here and in a few weeks I decide to kill myself, I'm going to do it sober. I'm not going to do it drunk. Whatever happens, I'm not drinking anymore. I would rather be dead than drink alcohol. So for me, making the decision to stop drinking wasn't some like difficult or noble decision. It was just, I'd actually gotten to a point where I'd rather be dead than drink alcohol. Well, that's a pretty easy decision to make once you get to that point. You know, it's until you've been to that point, it's hard to imagine what it feels like in that moment. But once you're there, it's not a hard decision to make. I mean, you're programmed biologically to survive. That's, you know, so there's a part of you that wants to live. And if it's a choice between living or drinking, well, that's easy. Then I'll just live. But you have to, but I'm not going to say you have to get there, but if you get there, that's an easy choice. But most people don't quite get there. That's one of the reasons that I think sometimes sobriety doesn't work for some people. But I did. So for me, it was relatively easy. I just decided, well, for sure, alcohol, fuck you, you're gone, no matter what. I did smoke some weed for a little while after that for the first couple of days, but that was it. That was my sobriety date. And I spent the winter in Auburn, California, or the beginning of the winter in Auburn, California. And then I knew where there was this cabin that was up in what's called the Desolation Wilderness up in Northern California. It's about 3 miles down. It's about 3 miles off the paved road. You have to get a 4-wheel drive and go back in there. And so I got to the cabin and I decided I'm going to live here until I figure out what the fuck is going on with me and what the fuck do I want to do with my life. And I wound up spending 6 months living at that cabin alone pretty much the whole time. And I would come to town once a week. I'd go to the VA and I'd see a shrink, which was amazing. And I'd restock my water and food supplies. And then I would head back up to the hill. And I lived in this place for 6 months. And every once in a while, you know, I'd see somebody that one of the people that was involved in my night in Reno chose to remain my friend. After a few weeks, we reconciled, and he and I are still friends. And he's probably next to my wife. This guy knows me better than any human being on this earth. I think he knows me fundamentally at who I am more than anybody, for sure, with the exception of my wife. And he for sure knows the old me the best of anybody who's still in touch with me. And this is what was cool about this arrangement was he worked at the Goodwill Donation Center. He had a job there, and his job was to sort the books that people from the city of Auburn, California donated to Goodwill. Well, Auburn, California is a very educated hippie community up in Northern California. So I had a library at this cabin that was just chock full of all the great philosophers and novelists and psychologists. And I had about 500 books that none of it was fiction, except for there was some fiction like Herman Hesse and Kurt Vonnegut, fiction, but it was thought-provoking philosophy for me. It wasn't just fiction. And And that's how I spent the rest of that winter and in through the beginning of the summer, into 2001. And then the story of the cabin, that's 6 months I spent at that cabin. That's a whole story in and of itself, because that was some intense shit. Man, I spent that 6 months breaking down who I had become, deciding who I wanted to be, and then trying to lay the groundwork to become that person. Like, it was a very methodical, systematic, like, dismantling, unpacking, analysis, and then reassembly. And then one day I just decided, you know what? I think I'm ready to re-enter the world. And reconnected with my family, stepped out into the world, re-enrolled in college, made new friends, got a job, then, eventually met my wife, got married, and now I have a phenomenal job with benefits, and I haven't had a drop to drink or any drugs in damn near 17 years. And best thing I've ever done was stop doing all that. But part of the reason for that being the best thing I've ever done was because of all of the horrific shit that led up to it, But that's my story. I did not attend any 12-step programs. I've been to meetings because I've obviously known, in the 17 years I've been sober, I've met people who did get sober through AA. I've met people who talked to me, connected with my story, wanted me to go to a meeting with them because they were trying to get sober. If anybody ever reaches out to me and says, hey, I want to quit drinking, I think I need to start going to some meetings or something. Would you go with me? Fucking A, I'll drop what I'm doing and go. I don't have, I think that at least initially, AA is still a better option than drinking. If you need to do that for a while to get yourself out of the bottle, man, do whatever you have. Not everybody has the opportunity to do what I did at the cabin. You know what I mean? So if it's AA, fine, great. Now, if you're still doing two meetings a day after nearly 20 years of sobriety because you're afraid if you miss one, you're going to fall off the wagon, brother, you missed the ship. Okay, but if you need to do 60 meetings in 60 days to help yourself get out of the bottle, and then you're going to be okay, hey, I'll go to some of those meetings with you. Absolutely. But do I believe AA is it even a very good solution? No. It is better than drinking, for sure, or using drugs. But is it a good? No. I actually have quite a few problems with the 12-step program personally. But like I said, not everybody has the opportunity or the personality to do what I did at the cabin. So it's to each his own once you're ready to get out of that hell. But I really believe this is something that I think is something that's ubiquitous. I really believe that if you are determined to be successful in your sobriety, one thing you have to accept is you have to get over your fear of death enough that you have to accept that even if this kills me, I am not going to drink or use again. You have to be ready. You have to be willing to give up your life for this sobriety, because you're going to give it up. If you get to the point where I did, you're going to give your life up eventually anyway. So why not give it up for something that you feel good about? So I think that you have to get to the point where you'd like, you know what? I don't care if you point a gun at me. I'm not going to drink again. And if you're that destructive of a drunk or an addict or an alcohol, a drug addict, then if you get to that point and you make that decision, then I believe you will be successful. But if you don't get to that point and you quit because you think other people expect you to quit, or you think maybe you kind of want to quit, or maybe there was an intervention, or somebody shipped you off to therapy, or you got arrested and you decided to do court mandated, counseling, and those are all external forces working on you to shove you towards sobriety. And the recidivism rate for that is super high. But if you get to the point where you'd rather die than fall back down that rabbit hole, I think you're destined for success, personally.
Wow. Kind of hard to follow up that. So that was your journey. I mean, of course, your mileage may vary.
Yeah. Results may vary.
Yeah. I mean, not everybody, I guess, has the kind of, I don't know what you would call it, the kind of internal fortitude to be able to get to that point. I don't know. Some, like you said, some people need that little push to try to get them over the hump, and some people never get to that point and just end up, dying. I mean, I guess it all depends on the person, but what I'm really struck by is the fact that you had that, like that internal voice, the driver, and you kind of knew the whole time that you were doing some fucked up shit. But a lot of people, I don't think, have that realization. They don't have that kind of internal voice telling them that. And I think that's part of the reason a lot of people have a lot of problem trying to come out of it.
Yep.
It's because they don't have that inner voice kind of helping them along, I guess. Trying, like, even when you're in the midst of doing some fucked up shit, saying, "What the fuck are you doing?"
Yeah, it's a mixed bag when you're in the moment, because you get to witness yourself debasing yourself in this, in these awful ways. But I don't know when I started becoming, and there's no way to talk about like hearing voices in your head and shit, or, like talking about the driver, like he's like, there's no way to talk about that without sounding mildly psychotic. And I'm aware of that. So, if people are thinking this motherfucker's crazy, you may be right. I'm not going to deny that allegation, but I don't remember when that started. Now, I grew up around a dad who was I was the oldest of children my dad was very physically and psychologically abusive. So it's altogether possible that part of me kicked in as a survival mechanism, pretty early. Because I don't remember when that started. Like, I don't remember having that sense of like, I would be like as a Marine or a firefighter and any number of the weird, crazy, insane situations I've been in my life. I've always had this like part of my mind that no matter what was, how much chaos there was around me, there's always been this part of my mind that was just like, okay, all right, we got this.
All right. Well, wow. That's a fucking hell of a story. You should write a book about it, really.
Yeah, but I don't know the ending yet.
Well, shit, then you'd have to get somebody to ghostwrite it, so have it after your death or whatever. And I'll probably outlive you, so maybe I'll.
Yeah, you probably will. Because only the good die young. Only the good die young. And you're clearly not good, so.
I did want to mention, you were talking about the 12-step program and how much you have any problems with you. And I'm probably going to put there's an article I read not too long ago about that, and we won't go into that right now, but I did want to mention that FFRF, Freedom from Religion Foundation, has an article on it, and it has some alternatives listed in this article. There's one called Smart Recovery. It's self-management and recovery training. And it says it's not claiming to be smarter than other groups. It's recognized by many professional health organizations and governmental agencies, which are listed and linked at smartrecovery.org/linkpage.htm. And it provides links to other groups. There's other groups: Women for Sobriety, secular organizations for sobriety, Life Ring, moderation management. There's a lot of stuff in here, and it's supposed to be, now, I don't know, again, results may vary, but it seems to me, just in a general level, that anything that's based more on science, or, I'm assuming these are based, I would hope so if it's on FFRF's page, but, evidence-based stuff, may be a little more, you can draw your own judgments from that, but I'm going to put the link up, and I would encourage anybody, make sure, of course, when you're in that situation, I guess you're not really thinking, let me do some research.
Right. And that's why I say if somebody's at a point where they feel like something's got to change, I need to do something. I desperately need to do something. If you're not sure and you wonder, should I go to a meeting? Go to a meeting and answer the question for yourself. Go to a 12-step meeting, but never stop being skeptical. Never stop that critical thinking part of your brain, because one of the things that the 12-step program wants you to do is to turn off that part of your brain, because they're going to tell you that that's the addict speaking. And they want you to turn this over to your higher power. Well, that's externalizing, and it's not accepting responsibility for decisions that you've made and will continue to make. And it's the exact same fundamental concept that religion's based in. It's differentiation from self, and it's not conducive towards successful sobriety. It's not conducive towards successful living, as far as I'm concerned. But if you enter into it, the first thing you'll do is surround yourself with people who don't drink. At least most of them don't, and that will be a start. But if you never turn off that critical, skeptical part of your brain that's constantly doubting and asking why, then eventually it'll lead you right back out of those meetings too, because you're going to find that. But you'll be in a better situation than you were when you were living in a bottle or in a syringe or in a spoon or whatever your particular, hell is. It's still a better, it's a vast improvement over that. So if you're wondering if you should get into therapy, then do it. For sure. If you're wondering if you should go to a meeting, for sure you should go to a meeting. But at no point in any of these modalities or methodologies or whatever they are, should you ever stop saying, is this working? Why am I here? And what purpose is this serving for me? And if you don't ever stop asking those questions, then you won't get led down the garden path by some esoteric bullshit,
Yeah, I think that goes for anything. The critical thinking skills, which seem to be in short supply in at least half the country.
Yeah, much shorter supply than I thought before.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have lost their faith. Faith isn't a great word in humanity. If indeed I ever had it, which it was precious little to begin with, but even that, it's even less now. So anyway, I want to thank you for coming on and telling your story. And in spite of anything else, I mean, it is a great fucking story. You have to admit,
Oh, it was fun living it, let me tell you.
Yeah, so I mean, it's live vicariously through your experiences or whatever. Maybe you can do a serial thing like in a magazine or some shit like that. Do we even have magazines anymore?
I think they're called blogs now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you could do a blog. That'd be cool. But anyway, yeah, thanks for coming on telling your story. I think these kind of stories help people a lot who are going through the same kind of shit. I mean, I don't want to sound but it does help if you're not alone.
Oh yeah, 100%. Absolutely.
And that goes for anything. Depression or addiction or anything like that. It helps.
It also helps you if you're beginning what seems like an insurmountable challenge of trying to get sober or turn your life around or whatever, however you want to look at it. It does help to know that people have succeeded at doing it. And the thing I would say to anybody who's, especially if you think you've hit rock bottom and you're looking at this, do I die or do I get on with living? Take it from somebody who made the call to live. It is worth it. You have to keep showing up, but eventually it's worth it, especially if you stay true to yourself and you stay true to the path of growth and evolution and progress. It is worth it. But you do have to keep showing up.
That's perfect. Perfect ending to this. Is there any, you used to have a podcast, but you're not doing that anymore. Is there anything you want to plug or anything?
No, not really. You can hit me up on social media. I'm always welcome people, and I promise to be as crude and offensive as possible. And I'm sure you can vouch for the fact that I will indeed do that.
Yes, indeed. And I quite enjoy it most of the time. Yeah, I'll put your link to your Facebook page. Why the fuck not? People can make their own.
They can step into that. They can step into that booby trap all by themselves.
That's right. As long as they're fully aware what they're getting into, and use their critical thinking skills to decide if they want to stay there and put up their bullshit.
Exactly.
All right, man. Well, again, thanks for coming on.
Hey, it was good talking to you, brother.
You too, man. Take care of yourself. That'll do it for this episode of the Podunk Polymath Podcast. I want to thank my friend Erik Pelham for coming on and talking to me about a difficult subject, and I'm glad his story ended well, and it just goes to show that you can get past anything if you really try, even though it's more difficult for some people than others. I won't pretend it's always easy, and I guess it just depends on the person and how far they are into it. So, like I said, I really appreciate him telling the story. So, of course, if you want to get in touch with the show, you can go to podunkpolymath.com. If you want to listen to music or buy the music of ... who does the music, cdbaby.com/cd/... Of course, you can also get in touch with the show through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and Google+. If you look for the Podunk Polymath, the email is podunk.polymath@gmail.com. If you want to become part of the Patreon posse, you can go to patreon.com/thepodunkpolymath. The call-in phone number is 615-378-POPO-7676, which is the double freedom you get when you call. I've given up begging you off to call the phone number, so do it, don't do it. I don't give a fuck anymore. Of course, you can join the closed group on Facebook, the Podunk Polymath Podcast Posse. You can go to the group/the Podunk Polymath Podcast Posse, all separated by periods. And of course, now I've got a Podunk Polymath Podcast online store at zazzle.com/podunk_polymath. I just got my shirt a couple of days ago, and I put some pictures up. It's hard to get the back, but it looks great. So if you want to have something like that, go to the store. And also there's another shirt, an alternate shirt, which was designed by Jeannie Eichert, friend and two-time guest. Or is it 3? I don't know. 3 times, I think. You can check out her shirt. And also there's a mug. So if you want to drink coffee with the Podunk Polymath Podcast, then you can drink it with that mug. And of course, if you look on the sidebar there, you will see that you can follow me on WordPress. There's my tweets right there, as well as you can donate by PayPal. You can subscribe on RSS, get it Google Play, iTunes, and Stitcher, and a button for the Patreon. There's recent posts as well as recent comments, which I haven't got that many comments lately, but that's okay. I'm okay with that. So thanks again to my friend for coming on talking to me. I always enjoy talking to him because I talked to him on a couple occasions, and I'll tell you one thing, that motherfucker can tell a story. He's just wow. I could listen to him forever. But anyway, again, I want to apologize for the quality of my voice. Of course, I always do palavers a couple of weeks ahead of time, so that's why my voice during that wasn't as bad, but it's pretty fucking horrible right now. So anyway, again, thanks everybody for the support. And I want to encourage just as a side note, to go like the Scenic City Skeptic over on Facebook. They're the people, Brian and Lexi, I met at NanoCon. They have a great podcast out of Chattanooga. Make sure you go like their page. They got good stuff coming out, and their fucking production is awesome. Shit, they got a great setup, so they sound good. And those sexy Chattanooga accents. So I'm gonna have to have them on, have a battle of the Southern accents, I guess. But anyway, I've rambled long enough. Thanks for listening again. Have a great week, and y'all take it easy now, okay?